is good writing and there is also not so good writing. Lots of literature, that's what we know. How do we find our way around so much literature? 16th century, 17th century, contemporary literature. What are we really looking for? And how do we find what we are looking for? Let's go across to a Guyanese writer who is living right now in Canada but has made his home in various parts of this world. Let's welcome Terence Roberts, a poet, prose writer, and a painter. Terence, welcome to Oral Tradition.
Thanks.
Great. Now, I said that there's a lot of literature about, and in the very first poem in Antipodal, right, the very first sentence, another book asking to be read. Another book asking to be read. How do we know if this is the book we want to read? Point us to
Mm.
good literature, good writing.
Uh, when I say I'm another book asking to be read, this is talking about the state of the world today, now, the accumulation. You mentioned 17th century literature. Imagine how, how much exists now because we don't erase that. It's still there. And people, students take courses in it and so forth and so on. However, you must remember that literature is defined often by time periods that where knowledge exists, certain amount of knowledge exists, and writers are acquainted with that knowledge, and so the difference between a bunch of writers or even a bunch of painters at a certain time and really good ones comes from the ability of the good ones to click in to knowledge other than writing. For example, philosophical knowledge about, I mean, if you read Descartes, Discourse on Method, or any of those books, I mean, you would be silly not to realize that such ideas that he put out are part of our advancing knowledge and has to be applied to the time you're living in, to the experience of living. So you can't be a writer and ignore all sorts of stuff, because you would be lacking behind. So when we look back, at a lot of literature, we see how mistaken much of the writing is, but it's good for the time, and it's maybe even was very popular in the time because everyone was in the same position. The writers, but the different ones, like Flaubert changed everything, because he became obsessed with writing. Writing and living are like two different things, or like history facts. The relationship between people say, "Oh, that's fiction. I don't read it. I read historical works. I read history." Well, history is fiction. You know why? Because it's a story. The only thing, it's a story about something, and then you could change it or don't change it. You read. If I've read Guyana's history, I've studied Guyana's history for 5 years. I mean, I've read books that are people can't find. I went into all of that. It was difficult. The amount of stuff that the average Guyanese or a student gets, it's obvious. I look at it, I see it, I know where it's coming from, and it's inadequate. It's not really. It's some of it is even as biased as the writers who wrote the books about the country. Oh, incredible biases. Some of it very sophisticated. You would fall right into it, like if you fall into a gutter, if you didn't if you weren't conscious of what that person is trying to do, what that person is, what that person is defending, what who's backing him up, what all kinds of stuff. Writers came to Guyana who were part of financiers in England, and so they wrote stuff to convince the financiers to
That's
get
right.
more involved. All sorts of stuff.
That's right.
Slander against the Dutch. Oh, their whole articles written about it. They were considered the lowest of low, and so that was applied in Guyana. There are lots of things people think about the Dutch in Guyana as like these terrible people. It's not true. It's just not true. Even slaves. The reason why coffee got so far was because the Dutch were so slack. Of all the slaves, the slackest. And, you know, that's why
I
it was the most
understand.
successful. He couldn't do that when slaves rebelled, when England ruled Guyana, 18 or early 19th century, 18 something, famous. In one day, their heads were chopped off and put on
On
staves
stakes.
around parade ground. In one day,
1823.
they were massacred. Coffee held out for how much? A year,
A,
two
over a
years?
year. Let's go back to categories and periods of writing, some of which you said is good or was good or popular for that particular period of time. But is there a danger of putting writers or putting writing in categories,
Well, it's not a category. It's
classifications?
no, no, no. Classifications are not. Time is a classification.
All
Time,
right, let's talk
time.
time.
So
Hmm.
okay, so you're in time at a time when 16 something or 17 something or so on, right? Uh, a certain amount of paraphernalia of your society is surrounding you. What are you going to write about? What are you going to? You're writing about things at that time. So that things at that time are defined by the knowledge circulating at that time, the
That's true.
misinformation, the ignorance, all kinds of stuff. So that's why we have books that people laugh at today and look at, but they're important because they tell us of how people thought at that time.
Yeah,
So when I say another book asking to be read, I was really just referring to today time because there's probably more junk written today. Writing is worse today in general than it was in the past. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Racine was a great writer. I mean, people Racine, the playwright. Like I can call lots of them Baroque writers. Absolutely fabulous. Rousseau was a great writer, apart from like a thinker. His Confessions is a great book. Like a not so lots of stuff. Uh, Good writing exists in Maupassant was absolutely fabulous.
yes,
Flaubert was the guy on top. Then you
yeah,
had Maupassant. They were in the same category,
yeah,
you know. Now, these writers were, Flaubert was definitely against poor literature. That's what his heroine read, and that's why she turned out the way she was. So that's
wow.
why Flaubert is so important because he's now criticizing literature itself.
That's a good background from which we can place our Guyanese literature and your own writing. And your own writing did not start with publication. You were writing for um, the Guyana Annual. I remember you won a number of prizes
Well,
there.
I came
You
from Expression, which was the magazine we had. Expression in the 1960s.
yes,
One issue edited by me and Johnny Gard, but it was started by, I had great teachers. One died, the late Milton Drapal. This is a time when Guyana was completely different. I've been back to Guyana. I lived there for like since 19 what? I came back in 1995 and I went on and off until 2014. So I knew the difference between the 1960s, 50s, and especially the 60s. Wow, we were lucky. Andy Williams, who's also a writer, it's called Vic Williams. I don't. I
yeah.
hope he's still alive. I'm not sure. Living in New York, he used to send me his books. He and Milton Drapal started Expression, and an English guy who was a VSO. Brian Cotton.
Yeah,
These
and
guys were like,
Shineborn, Jan was involved in that also.
oh yeah, she was one of the girls that was constant.
I remember Janice talking about the meeting place, Booker's, the Booker's
Oh,
bookstore, the bookstore there, and Fogarty's bookstore.
oh,
There were bookstores in Georgetown.
seven, seven,
Mhm.
seven bookstores, seven.
Ah, could you name a few of them?
Yeah, I could name them. Booker's at the Booker's Universal,
Yeah,
Fogarty's, which was a great bookstore. It was taking it became great. A Czechoslovakian lady who was married to an Afro Guyanese. I don't know if he was a doctor or what. Came back to Guyana, and she was like an intellectual. And she, I don't know, Fogarty's in conjunction with her was able to start this bookstore, and they had to be different because you can't have seven bookstores with the same kind of books. You know what I mean? Like it's
it,
not, so you're cutting out your own. Oh, Fogarty's cut out a part for themselves that was like, I mean, the film scripts of Michelangelo Antonioni, Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut, books on pop art. I first read Tom Wolfe's The Candy Colored Tangerine Flake Streamlined Baby, which was the new journalism. Influenced me. And that's a writer, again, where journalism, fact and fiction are
yeah,
together in a
yeah, yeah,
fabulous way.
right.
Unfortunately, he became a little bit, wishy washy coming down in his life, but he was a good writer, and that
Well,
book
we
just
change over
shot
the
up.
year, but continue naming the bookstores.
Oh,
SPCK,
gosh.
yeah,
Oh yeah. So when you left, so those two were like way downtown by Sandwich Park or in that area there. So if you're coming down Church Street, SPCK, because they were related to some religious thing. I think it's St. George's Cathedral. I don't know, whatever it is. They had good books like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, um, Kierkegaard, philosophical books that were leaning towards religion, but not that type of unquestionable religious doctrine or anything like that.
yeah.
So you had a lot of good books from SBCK. I bought quite a number of books. Then you had Argosy, which was an old bookstore, sort of like left with, I don't know, it was on Regent Street. It may be even still there. But at the time, it had great novels in the passageway.
The place is
Great.
still there. Yeah,
It's still,
they're
well,
selling stationaries and cards and things like that now, and
I
some
went back
books.
there. I went in there when I was taking. But you see, this the big difference is at that time, good literature, fantastic writing. I mean, the best in the world, the best was available all around.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, so Argosy had an. I bought Kierkegaard's The Present Age there, which was a very rare find. Um, well, let me go on then. Uh, the next bookstore that was quite good was Central High School. Rudy Luck, who was the principal, he
Yeah.
had a bookstore beneath there, a long bookstore, quite good, quite good. And Michael Ford, which was the uh, People's Progressive Party book. What was it called before? Just a PYO bookstore or something. And then when Michael Ford was killed in that bomb during the 60s, Mrs. Jagan renamed the bookstore after him, Michael Ford Bookshop. Mrs. Jagan and so on paid attention to writers, and she got those writers in her bookstore. So I bought Saint-Exupéry, Stendhal, Thomas Mann, Hemingway, Montreland. I mean, you name it. I got it. It was all up there in Penguin. I mean, I mean, like, every Saturday morning, myself and Johnny Gard, especially, we would ride our bicycles, do the tour. You know, we were like very close buddies before I became a painter. That's a very important point there about my writing that I'll tell you
Yeah,
about.
we'll touch on that. We'll touch on that. The painting aspect and the writing
Ah,
aspect.
yeah, yeah.
Obviously,
Chronicle had a bookstore. It was graphic at the time. A fabulous bookstore.
right.
Fabulous books. Everything. I mean, you can get paperbacks. Let me explain to you something. Something happened in the '60s, and this is to show you why the world is messed up. That's why even literature and art is like vanishing off the radar.